Okay, this is a class on The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It's another book that I'm pretty confident you can find if you look on Google, for a PDF version. And it's a very famous book. And so we're going to look at some of the first few paragraphs, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. And this is of the prologue, right at the beginning. And then we will look at chapter 1. And we're going to focus on the tenses. We're going to repeat what we learned in the last class because we were looking at tenses in One Day by David Nichols. Now we'll look at tenses in this book, but we will also look at third conditional, and we'll also look at some other past modals, because obviously third conditional would have done, looks like the other past modals, might have done, must have done, can't have done, could have done. Okay, so the story starts, and I think it's a good story for getting you hooked, it's certainly a page turner. I have some criticisms, but I think it is certainly a page turner, and so Donna's very skillful in the way she gets you interested in the plot. And so straight away we find out that the snow in the mountains was melting. Now notice how she uses past continuous as she introduces the scene. And this is really common in a story, in a narrative. You very often say something like, the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I was sitting in my garden. And you start with those three past continuous verbs because you're putting the reader right in the middle of the action. And I always tell you that I want you to think of continuous as in the middle of, because that's what it means. The snow in the mountains was in the middle of melting. It hadn't finished melting, it was in the middle of melting. And so we're right there in the mountains, and the snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny, this is clearly a name, but usually it isn't, but it's clearly a nickname, and we know that because it's got a capital. Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. So straight away there's a dead body, straight away in the very first sentence. And I want to draw your attention to the tense and also the signal word. I tell students all the time to look out for signal words. For, since, already, yet, how long, ever, never. All of these are signals for perfect tenses, and this is past perfect. And remember that this happened before we were in the middle of the snow melting, and so we really do need this. He had been dead for several weeks before, there's another sign, we came to understand, so this is the next event. Before he had been dead, he had already been dead for several weeks before we came to understand how important, how serious our situation was. Here we don't mean gravity like Isaac Newton's gravity, we mean the seriousness of our situation, and we very often use gravity in that second meaning as well. Okay, he had been dead for 10 days. We've got repetition straight away of the very first line, And by the way, a lot of this is paraphrased, so when you read the book, you'll see some other sentences in between some of these sentences. But it is almost right. I think it is the first two sentences where you get Bunny had been dead for several weeks, and then he had been dead for 10 days before, notice it's exactly the same as the first line, before they found him, Okay, now I want to quickly talk about, so this one we've done already, you've got the for, so you need the past perfect tense. If you're telling the narrative in present tenses, which is possible, then you would use present tense, You'd say the snow in the mountains is melting, and Bunny has been dead, for several weeks. That's also possible. That's a different, because you can tell a story in the present, but that's not what the writer chooses to do. Now we do have the present, and it's right here, at the end, And notice that the narrative, the events of the story are all in the past tenses. That's past continuous, that's past perfect, and that's past simple, and that's past simple, and that's past perfect. But when the narrator addresses you, the reader, he uses, it's Richard Papin who's the narrator, even though it's Donna who wrote it, Richard Papin is the narrator. When he addresses you, he says, because he's talking to you right now in the present. And so that's the effect that the narrator gives the story. Yeah, every time you're using these past tenses, they're the events of the story, but sometimes the narrator directly addresses you and uses present tense. And it happens again here in paragraph 2.